Most of you are probably familiar with director Ridley Scott. He has directed some of the most iconic films of the last few decades, but has also built a reputation around his less than stellar films. Kingdom of Heaven was one that seemed to fall somewhere in the middle for most people. Nothing terrible, but nothing too special either. During the editing process, there was a lot of discussion about how the film should be cut together, namely to fix one problem.
The first thing that came up, which is no surprise to anybody because this is usually the first note that comes out of any studio executive's mouth, is that it's too long.
Even after the tremendous success of Gladiator just a few years prior, the studio seemed to have doubts in Ridley's vision for the film and continued to pressure him and his team into making certain changes.
We were kind of stripping things out of the film at large, which was diminishing the sophistication. And what it did was it sort of took the narrative focus off of this grand tapestry and put a spotlight on the Balian character, which, although it's a very interesting arc, it wasn't the way Ridley had envisioned the story.
So essentially the film's editor, Dodi Dorn, was tasked with cutting two films simultaneously, one for the studio and theatrical release, and the longer, more sophisticated version meant for release as the director's cut. I think it's important to understand what the story is trying to accomplish to understand why these changes so adversely affect the film. So in case you've never seen the film and would like to follow along, or if you just need a memory jog, the story starts in France with the knight Godfrey returning home to find his bastard son Balin, in the hopes that he'll accompany him to Jerusalem and follow in serving King Baldwin. The king has held on to a tenuous peace between the Christians and the Muslims that many would seek to destroy, most notably Guy de Lusignan and Renaud de Chatillon, who function as the film's primary antagonists. That's essentially the first arc of the film, leading into the second and the third acts. In the beginning of the film, Godfrey wants Balin to follow him to Jerusalem, but Balin declines his offer until this moment happens. Causing him to ride after Godfrey, now hoping that he can find redemption for himself and for his wife, who committed suicide after losing her unborn child.
Is it true that in Jerusalem I can erase my sins? And those of my wife? Is it true?
We can find out together.
This is Balin's main driving motivation throughout the first act, and this inciting incident is what sets him on his journey. But in the theatrical cut, it comes off feeling unearned given the context leading up to the scene. There are only 3 scenes in total featuring the priest: at the burial of Balin's wife, at Balin's workshop with Godfrey and his knights, and again at Balin's workshop when he's killed. In this first scene, significant character moments are here, which certainly plays a role in his death, and here.
Wait.
She was a suicide. Cut off her head. And return the axe.
His second scene consists of him mostly in the background with barely any dialogue, and then in his final scene as he tries to convince Balin to go to Jerusalem, where he might find redemption for his wife.
If you take the crusade, you may relieve your wife's position in hell. I put it delicately. She was a suicide. She is in hell. Though what she does there without a head.
Okay, so the main problem is that throughout the rest of the film, Balin is defined as a typically non-violent person, only using violence to protect the innocent and in self-defense. And this character trait actually becomes very important at several different points in the film, but is communicated poorly by a lack of context surrounding Balin and this priest, where nothing we've been shown seems a valid justification for his murder. In the director's cut, however, the priest is featured in 7 scenes, 3 extended versions of original scenes, as well as 4 entirely new scenes, all of which give us more background on the priest and his relationship to Balin, starting in that very first scene where a significant detail is revealed.
Wait. You've forgotten. She was your brother's wife.
She was a suicide. Cut off her head.
This detail was removed completely from the theatrical release, but giving them this personal connection changes the perceived motivations of the characters drastically. Still though, Ordering for her beheading may not be inherently malicious. These were different times with different traditions. We don't know what the historical context is without the film clearly defining it, until we see more important information revealed in the director's cut as the town bishop asks of the burial.
You did not mutilate the person. No. A law can go too far. It can go too far, I ask myself. Would Jesus do it thusly?
This reveals to us that while it may be the law of the time, mutilating the body is not condoned by the church, something this priest would be well aware of, and yet does so anyways and lies directly when confronted with the question. But arguably the most important detail that was cut comes in this scene as Balian visits his wife's grave.
You never fight back.
This establishes a crucial character trait of Balian that I mentioned earlier, that he isn't violent by nature. Even suffering from intense grief and being provoked by his own brother, he remains calm. And when juxtaposed against this final confrontation, it gives us a better understanding of the weight of that moment. He didn't just lash out in grief and anger on some innocent priest whose only crime was doing his job, but struck down the man who mutilated his wife's body against the church's will, took her only remaining possession for himself, and continually taunted and provoked his own brother until he reached his absolute breaking point. Without these scenes and all of the important details revealed within, it clouds the judgment and the motivations of the characters, creating inconsistencies that profoundly affect the entire narrative of the film. I think the result can best be described by the film's editor, Dodi Dorn.
Because he shot it in such a way as that I had all of the literal connective tissue. So I knew that it would work. By work, I just mean that you could connect the dots. Because sometimes there are scenes that are so embedded in a narrative that you cannot take a scene out. You are left with a giant hole. And what the kind of holes that we were left with were not narrative holes, they were character holes. So to take the scenes out, you could still tell the story, but you're left with less emotion. And I think that an emotional connection gives value to a movie-going experience.
This is just the start of our hero's journey, and already so much of the nuance and the texture of the characters and their motivations has been lost. And this is more or less how the rest of the film plays out. There's even plenty more to uncover in the first act alone that I didn't discuss in this video, but for the sake of time, I'd be remiss if I didn't cover the most substantial alteration that comes into play at the climax of the film. To set the stage, before Balian arrives in Jerusalem, Godfrey succumbs to wounds inflicted in a prior battle, but not before making Balian a knight proper and leaving his homestead in Ibelin and men-at-arms in Balian's command. It's at his home in Ibelin that he begins having an affair in secret with Sibylla, the king's sister and wife of Guy de Lusignan, a French nobleman with the largest force in the kingdom, a man who detests Balian, believing that a bastard has no place in the king's company. Tensions in the kingdom rise as Guy and Renaud continue to instigate the Muslims in an attempt to start a war, nearly doing so after ambushing a Saracen caravan against the king's wishes. The peace is upheld when the king rides to meet Saladin and his forces, offering his word that Renaud will be punished for his crimes. Nearing death when his leprosy worsens after traveling to Carrick, the king presents Balian with an offer. Take command of the armies of Jerusalem, marry Sibylla, and keep the peace, with one caveat.
And Guy?
He will be executed, along with his knights who do not sway your allegiance.
I cannot be the cause of that.
And this is exactly why it's so important to have established this character trait of Balian earlier on. If all he has to do to prevent a war is to marry the woman he loves and allow the death of a man who would himself kill Balian without hesitation, just feels out of character and, moreover, naive. That he would kill a man out of anger, but not to save thousands of innocent lives? But establishing this aversion to violence earlier on carries a greater impact in this moment. The weight of this decision is not lost on Balian, but in his own words,
It is a kingdom of conscience, or nothing.
and it only gets worse from here. despite every other scene depicting Sibylla as kind and loving, a firm believer in her brother's vision of a kingdom for all to lay claim, to worship and to coexist, and despite knowing Guy's true nature and intentions to bring war to the kingdom, after the death of her brother, she makes a choice.
If I have your knights, you have your wife.
This is arguably the most pivotal moment in the film, for after Guy is crowned king, he immediately marches to war against the Muslims, and after his army destroyed, Reynald executed and Guy taken prisoner, Saladin begins marching his army to reclaim the city, leaving Balian in charge of its defense. This one selfish act from Sibylla results in the death of thousands of men, the near destruction of the city, and nearly the loss of everything that her brother fought so hard to protect, betraying everything we've come to learn about her character and cheapening the entire third act of the film as a result. All because of what, exactly? In the theatrical cut, it's really not clear. Just another character hole left in the wake of deleted scenes that give us a better understanding of her motivations. For as we learn in the director's cut, she had another reason for allowing Guy to take power.
My brother's dying. My son will be king and I his regent. I must rule for him.
Never mentioned or shown in the theatrical cut, Sibylla has a son from a previous marriage who will soon wear the crown, as her brother had no children of his own. Without her brother's protection, she fears for his safety, and not without good cause.
Then we must come to an understanding. You need my knights, or his rule will be bloody and brief.
With her brother dead, Tiberius and his men on the road to Cyprus, and Balian gone from the city, she had nowhere left to turn, making the only choice she felt that she could.
If my son has your knights, you have your wife.
Her decision must not have come easy, but what else was she to do? Let Guy take control of the city by force, leading to the death of her son? Or give him the war he so desperately wants as long as it means her son's safekeeping? She was willing to sacrifice anything and everything to protect him. It wasn't a selfish act of self-preservation, but a sacrifice made from a mother's love. And the cruel irony of it all is that not long after this sacrifice, it's discovered that, like his uncle before him, he too is a leper.
How long before he was a martyr? Will you have one made for him? How did my boy deserve it? Jerusalem is dead, Tiberius. No kingdom is worth my son alive in hell.
Believing she's saving him from eternal damnation, she makes another difficult choice. The moral complexity of her situation is completely lost by removing her son from the story. She sacrificed the kingdom to protect him, so if he isn't a part of the story, then what is she sacrificing it for? Nothing, as far as I can tell. It's a disgrace to such a beautifully crafted character and diminishes so much of the tension in the latter half of the film. The film as a whole is truly something to behold, but all of these different changes take the emotional core right out of the film and leaves us with more questions than answers, resulting in a film that feels hollow and, as one critic puts it, spectacularly empty. And it's just a shame to see because the film has largely been forgotten, thought of as a mediocre entry in Scott's otherwise prolific career, but I believe it deserves to be held in just as high of regard as Blade Runner or Alien, but with so much money on the line, it seemed that the studio got cold feet and continued to water down the film into something else.
There's always, in a project this expensive, you know, there are reticences that pop up about everything. About everything. It's why movies get processed into sludge. because everybody's spooked about this, or, spooked about this or that, and, it gets over-processed and all the edges taken off. And it just turns into porridge.
And I'm torn because on the one hand, they butchered a great film by cutting out all of the depth of the characters despite adamant resistance from the creative minds that they hired to make the film. But on the other hand, they commissioned a director's cut within a month of the film's release, hiring back all of the same talent to make sure that they got it right. And all of these different sound bites are pulled from the official DVD, so they're apparently not shying away from these ugly details. But one has to wonder how different the film's trajectory would have been had it been released in its proper form to begin with. At any rate, I'm just grateful the director's cut is out there at all. I think it was a respectable move on the part of the studio to push for its release, and I strongly urge everyone to see the film in its proper form, the way that it was always intended. Words truly cannot express just how much of a better film it really is, but I think Dodi succinctly describes it.
And to me, they feel like two different films. That one film seems like an action-adventure sword and sandal film, and the other film seems to me like a sophisticated historical epic.
Thank you for watching. I obviously didn't get a chance to cover every change between the two versions, so if you're looking for more information, I'll link to an in-depth post in the description that covers all of the changes, even the minor ones. If you're interested in seeing more on the topic of editing, I'd recommend watching my latest video as it deals with a very similar subject, just kind of from a different point of view and obviously with a different film. But also, I am excited to announce that I officially have t-shirts and mugs available on Teespring if you're interested in checking that out. I'd been wanting one for myself for some time, and I figured I might as well put them out there to be available for you guys as well. And it's another way of helping out the channel and helping out me specifically if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'm actually going to be giving one of these away, the crew neck in this gray color. It'll be a size medium, so if you're interested in receiving that, just let me know in the comments, and preferably leave me a way that I can contact you so I can send it along. As always, I want to say thank you to all of my patrons for helping me make these videos, especially with the lack of sponsorships lately. It's really helping me more than ever, and I really appreciate it. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.